Dennis, BJ, and the Air Force fire truck in 1974. At the age of 21, Dennis was a recent enlistee in the United States Air Force. He was stationed at a North American airbase where, though the war in Vietnam had recently ended, young fighter pilots were still being trained for combat. Dennis had been assigned to a fire and rescue unit, part of the extensive support and service system that exists at any airbase. But unlike the crash equipment standing by at most major commercial airports, his unit was actually called out from time to time when student pilots inevitably made errors landing or taking off. At the time of this disturbing 1974 incident, Dennis's young wife had just left him, a situation that made his military friendships, such as that with BJ, even more important to him. Dennis: on this particular night I was assigned to a first response team with my sergeant, BJ. We were good friends. BJ had been in Nam and was about 6 or 8 years older than me. We got along real well. We drove up to the flight line in our truck and parked in position. We set out our gear, our boots and stuff, and arranged them on the ground outside the doors of the truck so that we could get into them in a hurry if we had to. It was routine. I was sitting on the right side of the front seat and BJ was on the driver's side. We sat there a while, watching the takeoffs and landings, when I suddenly kind of woke up, leaning against BJ. BJ says, "What happened?" I say, "I don't know. I felt really sick. I vomited out the door, and some of it got on my boots." We realized we were late. We were supposed to be back to check in a couple of hours earlier because the landing and takeoff practice was over. We didn't know what had happened, but knew we had to haul ass. Our gear was scattered around. We picked up our boots and stuff and threw them in the truck. I remember that one of my shoes was off. My shirt was buttoned wrong and I was still feeling sick. Everything was kind of a mess. I don't think my pants were zipped or my belt buckled. There was a little blood from my nose. BJ was driving fast. I remember I lit 2 cigarettes on the way in. ... One was smoking one and had another one in my hand. I was shaking. I threw one of the cigarettes out the window. When we got back and parked the truck, we went inside and that's when I noticed I was wearing BJ's shirt and he was wearing mine. I looked down and saw his name tag on my shirt. I swear I have no idea how that happened. He had my name tag on his shirt. We didn't even talk about it, we just switched shirts and went to bed. It was just too weird. The next morning, I remember, I woke up and just sat on my bed and fucking cried. I didn't even go to roll call. They asked me to go to roll call and I said, I can't. I sat there and cried until about 9 o'clock, well after our flight. Our shift had left. I don't know if they wrote that up or not, but I remember talking to the civilian head of that shop. After that, he wanted to know if it was because of my wife leaving or what, and I said I wasn't sure. That's when I started going to a psychologist. We took some kidding after that, from some of the guys, just because when we came in we were messed up and they saw we were wearing each other's shirts. Like BJ and I had a thing going, but that was ridiculous. He started being a little cool towards me, I guess as a result of the kidding. The whole thing was just too weird and neither of us wanted to talk about it. BH: when did you first think this incident might have to do with UFO abductions? Dennis: only during the last couple of years. It was partly because of some flashbacks I've had about that night. And because of some missing time experiences I've had since then, connected with UFO sightings. Hypnotic regression subsequently revealed what apparently happened that night to Dennis and BJ. As they sat in their truck out by the flight line, Dennis saw a lot of light around us, coming straight down. When he stepped down from the truck to look up, he saw something descending. He felt someone grasp his left hand, and then he was going up. The figure holding his hand was a funny-looking person, like a Pillsbury Doughboy melted, skinny, stretched out, distorted. He described being taken through a clamshell-like opening and then placed on a table. A series of very painful quasi-medical procedures followed before he was returned to his truck, ill and disoriented. Again, what is most important for our purposes is not the long, harrowing hypnotic account of his UFO experience but Dennis's consciously recalled memories from that night 26 years ago. Since Dennis mentioned the teasing that followed his and BJ's arrival back at their barracks wearing each other's shirt, we must consider the possibility that the abduction was actually nothing more than a sexual tryst. But a massive problem with that idea should be immediately obvious. Why, if it was only a sexual tryst, would Dennis ever have mentioned it to me in the first place? Another debunking explanation would suggest the possibility that the two men were not sexually involved but instead were using drugs while they sat in their truck. But again, if that were so, the same problem arises. Why would Dennis have told me about the incident in the first place? And why would the men have taken off their shirts and exchanged them while doing drugs? Dennis's account was, to me, heartfelt in its telling and moving to hear. His is the kind of strong, self-sufficient, macho personality that is hesitant to confess to intense emotional turmoil and grief. And yet, he told me that the morning after his experience, I woke up and just sat on my bed and fucking cried. I didn't even go to roll call. In my dealings with Dennis, I have seen no reason why he would have invented this story and admitted to such a reaction. Once we accept his honesty, as I have, and recognize the similarities between his encounter and established abduction patterns, we must examine the setting of this incident, which is both unusual and extremely important. Dennis and, apparently, BJ were abducted from an official military vehicle parked on the tarmac at a U.S. Air Force base. Obviously, the personnel in the control tower that night would have been carefully monitoring all training flights, through radio and radar, while maintaining full visual contact. Anything unusual on or near the flight line would have been clearly visible from the tower. Any craft, Air Force trainer or UFO, approaching or leaving the airbase would have been tracked on radar. Any massive display of light shining down from a UFO onto a parked emergency vehicle would have immediately attracted attention. That is, of course, if the UFO, the light, and Dennis and BJ were not somehow temporarily unseeable. If the three foregoing cases, from 1948, 1957, and 1974, are to be regarded as credible, and, given their similarities to the consistent patterns in thousands upon thousands of later UFO patterns, they are credible, then the idea of a technology of invisibility seems inevitable. Chapter 3, Uncovering Clues to the Science of Invisibility. Why the spring of 1996, I'd been living for over 6 months in that initial state of imaginative, muddled suspense, with